Jesus Christ taught a lesson to a drug-dealing grandson who extorted his grandmother and took every bit of her hard-earned money. In a crumbling apartment on the south side of Chicago, Evelyn Carter's hands shook so hard her key barely found the lock. It was nearly midnight, too late for company, too late for anything good. The pounding at the door came again, violent enough to rattle the thin frame, and the hallway light flickered like it was afraid to stay on. Evelyn opened up just a crack and froze. Marcus stood there at 22, tall and hollow-eyed, tattoos crawling up his neck like warnings. A pistol sat heavy at his waistband, half hidden under a black hoodie. The boy she once carried to bed when sirens screamed outside was gone. What remained stared through her like she was just another obstacle in a city that never gave him mercy. Grandma, Marcus said, but there was no warmth in it, only urgency, only hunger. He pushed past her without asking, shutting the door with a final, ruthless click. Evelyn backed toward the living room, one hand pressed to her chest, the other reaching for the rosary she kept by the lamp. Her spine burned every step, a reminder of the surgery she'd been saving for dollar by dollar, month by month, out of a Social Security check that barely kept the lights on. Marcus didn't look at the photos on the wall. He didn't look at the worn couch where she used to sleep so he could have the bed. His gaze went straight to the old metal lockbox tucked under a loose floorboard. "I need $1,200, he said. "Right now." Evelyn whispered his name like a prayer, like a plea. "Marcus." "I don't have." His hand slid to the gun. "You love me, Grandma." "Right?" he asked, and the question landed like a blade. Evelyn's breath hitched. The room felt smaller. The air felt thinner, because she understood what he was really saying. Prove it. Not with words, not with tears, with her last lifeline. With the money meant to keep her from living the rest of her life bent in pain. And as Marcus stepped closer, eyes flat and unblinking, something unseen stepped into the darkness, with them silent, steady, and watching. Not the kind of presence that begged, the kind that judged. Because that night, in the space between a grandmother's love and a grandson's greed, heaven was about to answer. The apartment itself told the story before anyone spoke. Peeling paint clung to the walls like it was tired of holding on. A space heater hummed in the corner, fighting a Chicago winter it could never quite beat. The furniture didn't match, not because of style, but because each piece had arrived in a different year, donated, salvaged, or rescued from the curb. This was where Evelyn Carter had lived for decades, long enough to watch the neighborhood change names, colors, and rules, but never its hunger. Evelyn was 78, small-framed, her back permanently curved from years of labor. No one ever applauded. For more than half a century, she cleaned other people's offices, schools, and hallways. She scrubbed floors after hours while executives slept. She emptied trash cans filled with leftovers she could never afford. When her hands stiffened and her spine began to fail, she didn't complain. Pain was cheaper than rest. And rest to Evelyn had always felt like a luxury meant for someone else. She had raised her grandson, Marcus Carter, in this very apartment. When Marcus's mother died of an overdose and his father disappeared without a goodbye, Evelyn didn't hesitate. She took the boy in with nothing but a promise whispered to God that night, "I'll do the rest." She became mother, father, protector, provider. She learned to stretch groceries, to split meals, to sleep on the couch so Marcus could have the bed. Love to her was not spoken, it was endured. Marcus had not started as a bad kid. Teachers once said he was quiet, observant, sharp. But the streets outside the apartment taught louder lessons. On his block, money spoke faster than effort. Respect came from fear, not patience. While Evelyn worked double shifts, gangs offered Marcus something school never did: immediate worth, identity, belonging. And at 14, when hope runs thin and hunger runs deep, those offers feel like salvation. By 22, Marcus no longer walked like someone afraid of the world. He moved like someone who expected it to move out of his way. Tattoos marked his skin with stories he never told. Violence had taught him efficiency. The streets had taught him that weakness gets eaten alive. And somewhere along the way, the line between survival and cruelty had disappeared. To Evelyn, he was still the boy she rocked during thunderstorms. To Marcus, she had become something else: steady, predictable, exploitable. Her love was unquestioning. Her fear was visible. And in his world, that made her dangerous in a different way. Because it worked. That night, as Evelyn stood trembling in her own living room, and Marcus stared at the lockbox beneath the floor, Two lives shaped by the same broken system collided. One had chosen sacrifice. The other had chosen power. And both, whether they knew it or not, were about to be seen fully finally and without excuses. Marcus Carter had not been born into violence. As a child, he learned the city through sound before sight. The wail of sirens at night, the sharp crack of arguments through thin walls, the distant echo of gunshots that adults pretended were fireworks. By the time he could spell his own name, he already understood one truth: the neighborhood taught relentlessly nothing. Here was designed to protect him. School was supposed to be the escape. It wasn't. Classrooms were overcrowded, teachers rotated in and out like temporary shelter. And Marcus learned early that attention went to the loudest troublemakers or the kids already winning. He was neither. He sat in the middle rows, smart enough to pass invisible enough to be forgotten. When he fell behind, no one called home. When he stopped caring, no one noticed. At home, Evelyn tried to fill every crack the world left open. She packed lunches from leftovers, checked homework with tired eyes, and prayed over Marcus every night before bed. But prayer could not shorten streets filled with temptation, and love could not compete with what waited outside men with clean sneakers, heavy chains, and pockets full of cash, who seemed immune to fear. The system failed quietly at first. Marcus watched classmates disappear from school reappear weeks later with new phones and easy smiles. He heard stories of money earned in hours instead of weeks, of respect that didn't require permission. No counselor explained college paths. No mentor showed him another version of manhood. What he saw over and over was this: effort stayed poor. Power did not. When Marcus was 14, hunger made the decision for him. Evelyn missed work after her back gave out one winter, and the fridge sat almost empty. A local dealer noticed. The pitch was simple. Just hold this. $50 became groceries. Groceries became relief. Relief became a habit. And the streets, unlike school, rewarded him immediately. From there, the slope was steep. Small jobs turned into regular runs. Regular runs turned into protection work. Violence arrived not as a shock, but as a requirement. The first time Marcus hurt someone, he didn't sleep. The second time, he didn't feel much at all. By the third, he understood the rule that governed everything around him. Hesitation is a liability. Adults later called it choice. Marcus knew it felt more like gravity. By the time he was grown, the system had already shaped him. Police encounters came fast and harsh. Job applications went nowhere. Every path back seemed blocked, every path forward stained. The streets had raised him, fed him, armed him, and they expected payment. And Evelyn, still waking before dawn, still cleaning buildings she would never own, remained the only constant. To her, Marcus was still redeemable. To the world, he was already written off. To himself, he was surviving. What none of them realized was that systems can explain a man, but they cannot absolve him. And the boy who had once been crushed by neglect was now standing at the edge of becoming something far worse. Evelyn Carter never called what she did sacrifice. To her, it was simply what love required. It showed up in the hours before sunrise when her alarm rang at 4:15 a.m. and she rolled out of bed already tired. It lived in the ache of her spine as she dressed quietly, careful not to wake Marcus when he was still young enough to sleep without fear. It lived in the way she brewed coffee, thin stretching it over days, and saved the better food for him. For more than 50 years, Evelyn cleaned buildings she would never work in during the daytime. Offices where lights stayed on all night. Schools emptied of children but full of mess. Hospitals where other people were treated while she ignored her own pain. She scrubbed floors on hands and knees long after doctors told her she shouldn't. She told herself she could rest later. There was always later until there wasn't. When Marcus came into her life for good, she rearranged everything without complaint. She moved from the bedroom to the couch so he could sleep better. She cut her meals in half so his plate would look full. On winters when the heat barely worked, she wrapped him in blankets and kept her coat on indoors. When shoes wore thin or backpacks ripped, she found a way. She always found a way. Evelyn's love was quiet but relentless. She attended parent meetings alone, signed report cards with hands rough from bleach and soap. She learned the schedules of bus routes, food pantries, and free clinics by memory. When Marcus struggled in school, she stayed up late trying to understand homework she'd never been taught herself. When he came home, angry, silent, distant, she didn't push. She prayed instead. The pain in her back grew worse each year. By her early 70s, walking more than a block felt like climbing a hill. Doctors talked about surgery, something that could straighten her spine, give her sleep without fire running down her legs. It wasn't cheap. And so Evelyn began another quiet ritual. She saved $20 here, $10 there. She skipped prescriptions. She skipped new clothes. She skipped rest. The lockbox under the floor became her promise to herself. A future where she might stand without wincing, where she might sleep in a bed again, where work would no longer demand blood in exchange for survival. Through all of it, Marcus remained the reason she kept going. Even when the signs worried her, even when his clothes changed, even when strangers with hard eyes started knocking at the door. Evelyn chose hope because love had trained her to. She believed if she endured long enough, something would turn. That sacrifice, if made deeply and quietly enough, would be rewarded. That the boy she raised would remember who she had been for him. That night, as she stood in her living room, facing the consequences of a lifetime spent giving Evelyn Carter, still did not think of herself as a victim. She thought of herself as a grandmother. And in her mind, that meant one thing above all else. You do not stop loving, no matter the cost. The moment Marcus stepped fully into the apartment, something fundamental broke. Not the door, not the lock. Trust. The kind that takes decades to build and only seconds to shatter. The room felt smaller with him inside, as if the walls themselves were backing away. Evelyn watched him move with a stranger's confidence. He didn't sit. He didn't look around. He paced, slow, controlled eyes scanning the floor, the corners, the places where she kept what little she had left. His hand never left the gun at his waist. It didn't need to. Its presence did the work for him. "I need the money," Marcus said again, calmer now, more certain. All of it. Evelyn's mouth went dry. She tried to speak, but the words tangled. That money wasn't extra. It wasn't savings. It was her body's last chance at mercy. She took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. Pain shot up her spine, sharp enough to steal her breath. "Marcus, please," she whispered. "That's for my surgery." He stopped pacing, turned, looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he's already solved. "You can wait," he said. "I can't." She shook her head, tears welling, hands lifting instinctively as if that might protect her. "I don't have anything else," she said. "I've given you everything." Marcus exhaled through his nose, impatient. He reached down, lifted the loose floorboard with his boot, and revealed the lockbox. He hadn't guessed. He had known. The sight of it made Evelyn's knees weaken. Her secret, her hope, exposed. She stepped between him and the box, small and trembling, her body acting before her mind could catch up. "Please," she said again. "I'm begging you." Marcus's jaw tightened. In one swift motion, he drew the gun, not wildly, not shaking. Precisely. He raised it just enough for her to see the barrel. "You love me, Grandma," he said quietly. "Don't you?" The question landed heavier than the weapon. It wasn't a threat dressed as violence. It was a demand dressed as love. Evelyn felt the trap close. If she said no, she lost him. If she said yes, she lost herself. Either way, something sacred would die in that room. Her hands shook as she turned away. Each step toward the lockbox felt like walking backward through her own life, through early mornings, missed meals, nights spent awake praying for a boy who now stood behind her with a gun. She opened the box, counted the bills she already knew by heart, every dollar placed there with pain and patience. She held them out. Marcus took the money without hesitation. He didn't thank her. He smiled. "See," he said, tucking the bills into his jacket. "I knew you'd understand." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Don't tell anyone," he added casually. "You know what happens if you do." The door closed behind him with a hollow sound. Evelyn sank to the floor, clutching her chest, the room spinning. The surgery was gone. The future was gone. And the boy she raised, no longer a boy, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This was no longer desperation. This was betrayal. The silence after the door closed was heavier than the threat that came before it. It pressed into the apartment, filling every corner Marcus had left behind. Evelyn remained on the floor, her back against the couch, eyes fixed on the place where he had stood. For a long moment, she didn't move. She couldn't. Her body trembled as if it had finally been given permission to feel everything it had been holding back. Her chest tightened, breath coming in a short, uneven pulls. The pain in her spine flared sharper now, unrestrained by hope. She tried to stand, reaching for the edge of the couch, but her legs gave out. The surgery money was gone. With it went the promise she had whispered to herself through years of aching nights that one day the pain would ease. Evelyn lowered her head into her hands and the tears came. Not loud at first. Quiet, broken, like something collapsing inward. She cried for the future she would never have. For the mornings that would still begin in agony. For the simple dignity of walking without wincing, sleeping without fire crawling down her back. But beneath all of it, deeper and heavier, was a grief that had nothing to do with her body. She had lost Marcus. Not to the streets, not to drugs, not to violence in some distant alley. She had lost him in her own living room. The boy she fed when there wasn't enough. The child she shielded from a world that showed no mercy. The man who had just looked at her fear and used it as a weapon. Evelyn's sobs shook her thin frame. She pressed her forehead to the floor, the cold seeping through her skin, and for the first time in years, she didn't know what to pray. The words she had relied on protect him, guide him, save him felt hollow now. Prayer had not stopped this. Love had not prevented it. She thought of the lockbox now empty and understood what it truly represented. It wasn't just money. It was her belief that sacrifice could fix anything. That if she gave enough, endured enough, the world would soften in return. That night stripped that belief bare. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost its shape. Outside, a siren wailed and faded, just another sound in a neighborhood that never slept. Evelyn eventually pulled herself onto the couch, curling inward, to ease the pain, arms wrapped tightly around her chest, as if holding herself together. She knew she could tell no one. Marcus had made that clear. Fear settled over her like a second blanket, thick, suffocating. Even if she wanted help, where would she go? Who would believe that a grandson would point a gun at his own grandmother? And even if they did, what, then calling for justice felt like condemning the last piece of family she had left. As dawn crept through the blinds, thin and gray, Evelyn stared at the ceiling with dry, exhausted eyes. Something inside her had shifted. The woman who believed love could endure anything was gone. In her place sat someone older, heavier, painfully awake. She had spent her life protecting a child from the cruelty of the world. Now she understood. The cruelty had come home. 5 miles away, the music was so loud it drowned out thought. Bass rattled the walls of the underground club, neon lights flashing over bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, sweat and smoke hanging thick in the air. To Marcus, the noise felt like victory. The city that had pressed him down for years finally seemed quiet under the weight of his own power. He pushed through the crowd with ease, money folded thick in his pocket, gun heavy at his side like a badge. Drinks came fast. Liquor burned his throat, sharp and clean, cutting through the last remnants of adrenaline. Around him, men laughed loudly, flashing chains and scars like trophies. This was the world that had rewarded him, fast, brutal, and certain. Marcus slapped a stack of bills on the bar. "Next round's on me." Cheers erupted. Someone turned the music up higher. The night blurred into motion, glasses, clinking hands, raised laughter, echoing off concrete walls. When a friend asked where the money came from, Marcus smirked. "My grandma," he said as if it were a punchline. A few laughed harder. No one flinched. In this room, compassion was weakness and family was leverage. Someone clapped him on the shoulder, shaking their head in admiration. "That's cold," the man said, grinning. "But smart." Marcus leaned back, letting the approval settle in his chest. Fear had worked. It always did. He thought of Evelyn's shaking hands, the look in her eyes when he raised the gun, and instead of guilt, he felt relief. Power, he had learned, was the absence of hesitation, and tonight he had none. As the night wore on, the money disappeared into bottles and powders, traded for a few hours of forgetting. Marcus laughed louder than the rest, his voice sharp, almost daring the world to challenge him. Every cheer felt like confirmation that he had chosen the right side of the city's rules. But beneath the noise, something else followed him. A flicker he couldn't quite name. It crept in during the brief silences between songs, in the way his jaw tightened when someone mentioned family. He drowned it quickly. Another drink, another laugh, another reminder that softness had no place here. Near dawn, the crowd thinned. Friends drifted off into the night, leaving Marcus alone, with the echo of music still pulsing through his chest. He checked his phone. No messages, no missed calls. He told himself that was good. That silence meant control. He stepped outside into the cold air, breathing deep, the city stretching wide and indifferent before him. Somewhere an old woman sat alone in the dark. Somewhere pain settled into bones that would not heal. Marcus did not think about that. He thought about tomorrow, about how easy it would be to do it again. Because in his world the weak paid and the strong celebrated. And he believed with dangerous certainty that nothing was coming for him. The night did not end the way Marcus expected. Back in his apartment, the music was gone, replaced by a silence that felt unnatural, like the city itself had paused to listen. He dropped onto the edge of the bed shoes, still on the gun set beneath the pillow, by instinct rather than thought. The room smelled of smoke and sweat, the remains of a life he believed he controlled. Then the light changed. It did not flicker on. It did not burst through the window. It simply was a steady, impossible brightness that filled the room without casting a single shadow. Marcus stiffened. His hand went for the gun, heart hammering, breath shallow. The door had not opened. No footsteps approached, and yet someone stood there. This was not the Jesus Marcus had seen on church walls as a child, not the gentle figure holding lamb's eyes soft and distant. This presence was heavier, older, real in a way that made the air itself feel thick. Jesus Christ stood in the room like truth, made visible calm, unhurried, and utterly unmoved by fear. Marcus. Just one word, spoken quietly, spoken with authority that did not need volume. Marcus dropped to his knees before he understood why. His body responded before his mind could argue. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The gun clattered uselessly to the floor. Jesus did not step forward. He did not raise his voice. His eyes held Marcus in place, not with anger, but with something far more terrifying. Complete knowledge. "I saw her," Jesus said. "Every night she went without sleep. Every meal she skipped. Every dollar she hid away so you could have a future." Marcus shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I had no choice," he gasped. "This is how the world works." Jesus did not contradict him. He simply answered, "And now you will see how love works." With a single motion, the room fell away. Marcus was no longer kneeling on a stained carpet. He was standing inside his grandmother's life, watching her clean floors until her hands bled, watching her wince through pain she never named, watching her pray over him when he came home late, smelling of the streets. Each scene struck him like a blow, not images, experience. The pain hit next, her pain. His back burned as if crushed by decades of labor. Hunger clawed at his stomach. Exhaustion pressed down on his chest until breathing felt like work. 50 years of sacrifice collapsed into a single moment, and Marcus screamed not from fear, but from understanding. Jesus' voice cut through the agony, steady and unyielding. "You felt powerful when you took from her. Now feel what she carried for you." Marcus sobbed, his body racked with a pain no drug could numb. "Make it stop," he cried. "I'll do anything." Jesus looked at him not as a victim, not as a monster, but as a man standing at the edge of his own soul. "I will not force you," he said, "but you will choose." The light began to fade. The room returned. The pain lingered. Jesus was gone. Marcus collapsed onto the floor, shaking breath, ragged eyes wide open in the dark. The celebration was over. The illusion of safety was gone. For the first time in his life, Marcus understood this truth with terrifying clarity. He had been seen. The judgment did not end when the light disappeared. It stayed with Marcus, pressing into him long after the room returned to its familiar darkness. He lay on the floor, soaked in sweat, his body trembling as if it no longer belonged to him. Every breath hurt. Every movement felt earned through pain. What Jesus had shown him did not fade like a dream. It deepened. When Marcus closed his eyes, he was there again, inside Evelyn's days. He felt the alarm ripping her from sleep before dawn. He felt the stiffness in her legs as she stood, the sharp protest in her spine that never stopped arguing. He felt the weight of mop buckets drag down endless hallways, the sting of bleach cracking skin, the humiliation of cleaning messes left by people who never learned her name. Then came the nights, the hunger she never mentioned, the way she drank water to quiet her stomach so he could eat. The hours she lay awake on the couch, listening for his footsteps, praying he would come home alive. Marcus felt the fear settle into his chest like a stone. Fear she carried silently because someone had to be strong. The pain intensified, relentless now. His back burned as if crushed under decades of labor. His arms ached with exhaustion he had never known. His chest tightened with the suffocating weight of responsibility of loving someone more than life itself, while knowing the world might take them anyway. Marcus clawed at the floor, gasping. This was not punishment measured in minutes. This was understanding measured in suffering. He saw the lockbox again, not as a hiding place, but as a monument. Every bill inside it was a sacrifice. Every dollar a moment she chose his future over her own body. And he saw himself standing there with a gun using her love as leverage. A sob tore out of him, raw and animal. "I didn't know," he whispered into the empty room. But the truth was sharper than the pain. He had known enough. The judgment was not shouting. It was clarity. It stripped away every excuse the streets had given him. Poverty explained his anger. Abandonment explained his rage. But nothing explained pointing a gun at the woman who had given him everything. Marcus curled inward, hands pressed against his chest as if trying to hold his heart together. He felt smaller than he ever had, not weak but exposed. The version of himself he had built to survive could not stand in this light. This was what Jesus had done. He had not struck Marcus down. He had not dragged him to the ground with force. He had done something far worse, something far more just. He had made Marcus feel the full weight of what he had stolen. Time lost meaning. Eventually the pain eased, not gone, but settled like a sentence waiting to be completed. Marcus lay still, staring at the ceiling, tears running silently into his hair. For the first time, the streets had nothing left to offer him, and for the first time, Marcus understood that judgment was not about destruction. It was about truth revealed so completely that there was nowhere left to hide. Morning arrived without relief. The city woke as it always did, sirens, traffic, footsteps in hallways. But Marcus did not move with it. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at hands that no longer felt like tools of power. They shook, not from fear of rivals, from the weight of truth that would not let go. The pain had eased, but the knowing remained. What he had felt in the night had not been a warning meant to scare him straight. It had been an invitation, terrifying precisely because it required consent. Jesus Christ had not chained him to the floor. He had left him standing fully awake with the consequences laid bare. Outside, his phone buzzed. Missed calls, stacked up names from the streets, demands, reminders of debts and expectations. The old path waited, familiar and efficient. He could disappear into it again by noon. Fear would still work. Money would still come. The city would still reward him for hardness. But now there was another ledger open in his mind. Marcus stood and crossed the room slowly, every step deliberate. He lifted the mattress, reached beneath, and pulled out the bag where he kept his cash. He counted it not with pride but with precision. Drug money, blood money, the kind that bought nights like last night and futures like the one he had just seen through Evelyn's eyes. He wrote a letter with hands that steadied as the words formed. Not excuses, not promises, confession. He named what he had done. He named what he had stolen. He named himself honestly for the first time in years. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table beside the money. The walk to the station felt longer than any run he had ever made. Each block stripped away another layer of the man he had been pretending to be. When he stepped through the doors, officers looked up with practiced indifference until he spoke. "I'm here to turn myself in." They didn't believe him at first. They asked questions. They waited for bargaining. None came. Marcus told them everything. The extortion, the violence, the deaths he had helped cause. He did not soften the edges. He did not ask for mercy. He asked for record. Hours later, as statements were signed and charges stacked, the reality settled in. This choice would cost him years. It would cost him status, freedom, the protection of the streets. It would cost him everything the world had taught him to value. And that was the point. Because repentance that keeps its comforts is not repentance at all. Marcus understood this with a clarity that surprised him. If Evelyn's suffering had taught him anything, it was that love proves itself in what it is willing to lose. By the time he was processed, the sun had climbed high enough to cast hard light through barred windows. Marcus sat still, breathing evenly. He was afraid, but not of the future. He was afraid of wasting this moment by turning back. He had chosen, not the path that let him escape pain, the path that required him to carry it honestly. For the first time, the cost felt right. The cost came swiftly and it came fully. Charges stacked one after another, extortion, weapons violations, conspiracy crimes the streets had normalized, but the law never forgot. Marcus listened as the words were read aloud, each count sealing the choice he had already made. There was no bargaining, no sudden miracle to erase consequences. Redemption did not cancel justice. It passed straight through it. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Evelyn Carter's apartment. The envelope was plain. The handwriting was careful, unfamiliar. She opened it slowly, hands still unsteady, expecting fear. Instead, she found confession. Marcus did not ask for forgiveness. He did not explain himself away. He named what he had done. He wrote that he had seen her life, truly seen it, and that the seeing had broken him open. He wrote that all the money he had taken and everything else he had was enclosed, that she should use it for her surgery, that she should live without pain, that he accepted whatever sentence came next. At the bottom of the page, there were only 4 words: "I am paying now." Evelyn read the letter twice, then a third time. She sat down slowly, the room quiet around her, and let the paper rest in her lap. The money paid for the surgery. It paid for heat through the winter. It paid for nights of sleep that did not end in tears. But what unsettled her most was not the relief, it was the truth that had finally reached her grandson. Marcus received a long sentence. Years measured not in days, but in the slow discipline of routine. Prison stripped him of the armor the streets had built. There were no shortcuts there, no fear to borrow, only time and the weight of reflection it forced upon him. He learned to sit with silence. He learned to name his sins without flinching. He learned to pray not for escape, but for endurance. Once Evelyn came to see him. He stood when she entered, thinner, now eyes clear in a way they had never been before. Tears came quickly. He called himself unworthy. She stopped him with a single touch on his arm. "You finally told the truth," she said. "That matters." They did not speak long. They did not need to. The distance between them remained, but it was no longer poisoned. It was honest. Evelyn lived 5 more years. She walked straighter. She slept in a bed again. When she died, it was quietly, without fear, her work finished. The news reached Marcus through official channels. He wept alone in his cell, not with despair, but with gratitude. The love he had nearly destroyed had outlived his worst moment. This was the redemption Jesus Christ had offered, not freedom from consequence, but freedom within it. A redemption that did not erase the past, but redeemed it by demanding truth payment and change. Marcus remained behind bars, but the man who had walked in carrying a gun no longer existed. And in that costly exchange, justice satisfied love, honored truth, embraced salvation, had done its quiet, irreversible work. The story did not end with a sentence or a grave. It continued in quieter places where consequences turn into meaning and suffering leaves behind something usable. Evelyn Carter's apartment changed first. The heater worked without strain. The couch was replaced with a proper bed. Mornings no longer began with pain sharp enough to steal breath. She moved slowly, but she moved upright. For the first time in decades, her body rested in a way her spirit always had. People in the building noticed. They asked questions. Evelyn answered simply. She did not speak of guns or terror. She spoke of truth. She spoke of a grandson who finally chose to pay for what he had done. She spoke of mercy that did not excuse evil, but refused to abandon the sinner. And when asked how such a change was possible, she only said that Jesus Christ sees what others overlook and requires what others avoid. Marcus's legacy unfolded differently. Behind concrete walls and steel doors, he became known not for violence, but for stillness. He worked, he listened, he prayed, he spoke less and meant more. Men who mocked faith began to ask questions in whispers, not because Marcus preached, but because he had stopped running. He accepted the weight of his past without letting it define his future. In a place built to strip men of dignity, he learned how costly dignity really is. Years passed. When news came of Evelyn's death, it did not crush him. It steadied him. He understood then that love had not failed, only delayed. The woman he betrayed had lived to see the truth restored. The sacrifice she made had not been erased, it had been honored. And the boy she raised, though broken, had not been lost. This is the legacy they left behind together. That poverty can explain despair, but it cannot excuse cruelty. That love without boundaries can be exploited, but love anchored in truth can still redeem. That forgiveness does not cancel justice. It completes it. And that redemption, when it is real, always costs something. This story leaves behind a quiet but powerful lesson, especially for those who have lived long enough to understand sacrifice. Love is strongest when it gives, but love must never become permission for abuse. Caring for family does not mean enduring harm in silence, and protecting someone does not mean shielding them from responsibility. Even deep wounds, betrayal, and regret are not beyond healing, but healing requires truth, courage, and accountability. Through this story, we are reminded that Jesus Christ does not ignore suffering that happens behind closed doors. He sees the elderly who are exploited, the caregivers who give until nothing is left, and the broken souls who believe it is too late to change. Justice and mercy are not opposites, they work together to restore dignity. If this message spoke to your heart, please subscribe to our channel to continue receiving stories of faith, justice, and hope. Share this video with someone who may need encouragement and leave a comment below to tell us what part touched you most. Your voice matters and your story may help someone else heal.